Welcome back to the Sasha Davis podcast. Today I have an amazing conversation with Jonathon Aslay. The focus of one of America's leading midlife dating coaches has expanded into a deeper, essential philosophy of what it truly means to love. After losing his 19-year-old son Connor in 2018, Jonathon Aslay's grief led him on a soul-searching inner journey where he became aware of an often overlooked dimension of the dating conversation. He realized that the process of dating reveals the most common emotional health issue faced by many singles seeking a partner, a distressing lack of self-worth, self-regard, and self-love. Today, he is on a mission of encouraging both men and women to fully love themselves with a new book, What the Heck is Self-Love Anyways? This is packed with fun, engaging spiritual and personal growth practices. His dynamic midlife love mastery mentorship program, and this inspires hundreds of people daily around the world, and his new podcast, What Would Love Do? You guys are really going to enjoy this conversation. He puts a swing on self-love, especially coming from the male perspective. You guys are going to love this. I feel like you will get a lot of nuggets out of this conversation. So here we go. Welcome back to the podcast today, guys. I have another special guest, Jonathon. So what I'm going to have him talk about, we're going to hit on all kinds of topics, but right before I hit record, we were talking a little bit about self-love. We were talking about grief. We were talking about dating after divorce. It sounds like he's been through a lot. So I'm just as anxious to hear about his story and what he has to share with our listeners as you guys are. So Jonathon, can you go ahead and introduce yourself for everybody?
Sure. Thank you so much, Sasha. I'm so honored to be on your podcast. This is a lot of fun. So thank you so much.
Yeah, this is awesome. So tell me, how did you get into being a women's self-love coach? Is that?
Well, I'm perfect by trade. I'll call myself a dating and relationship coach. And how I got this, any male who's a dating and relationship coach, it's the way you get into it is always kind of a funky way. After turning 40 and going through a divorce back in 2005, I found myself single, and I thought, oh, and this thing called internet dating, was just starting to become popular. And I thought, oh, it's really simple. You can plug in what you want, and someone would magically appear. And sure enough, I'll never forget. I had met a woman for a first date. We had a great time, nice woman, but something wasn't right. And then a couple days later, another woman, nice date, nice woman, something wasn't right. This happened over and over again. And in 1 year, I had over 100 internet dates.
Holy smokes.
Yeah. And I realized that something wasn't right with me. I was incredibly dysfunctional. So I started, the movie The Secret came out around that time.
You are speaking my language.
Yeah.
Yes. 2006?
Yeah, 2006. So and I think I watched it, I think in 2006, 2007. I'm like, oh, this so resonates with me. And I started to get into personal development and self-help and spiritual work. And, but what was interesting, Sasha, is during this time, I'm talking to women via the internet, and some of them I'm not actually dating. I'm just talking to women on the phone, talking to women who live locally, some who live thousands of miles away, just making friends. And then what was happening? All these women were reaching out, Jonathon, can you help me make my profile better? Because I wasn't dating them. We were just developing friendships. And I go, okay, change this picture, do this, do that. And then I get a phone call 3 weeks later to go, oh my God, I met a great guy. They go, will you check out his profile and tell me what you think? And I'm like, okay. So I would read a guy's profile, and I just had a certain sixth sense. I had a knack of like reading men. And I jokingly say, do you know how the FBI have profilers for serial killers? I can profile serial daters, serial monogamous, nice guys, bad boys, and the guy looking for you. And literally my coaching practice was birthed by giving advice on helping to improve profiles and helping women to understand men.
I love that. Oh, shoot. Okay. So you're helping women, and how did you do that? You just had like one-on-one calls and you're helping them with their profiles. And then how many successful relationships came of that? Or how did you birth that into a business?
Well, what was interesting, thank you for asking. So at first it was like, I'll be honest, I was giving advice for Starbucks cards, I'm like, just send me a Starbucks card and I'll give you my perspective. But I began studying relationships. I bought book after book after book on relationships and understanding the mechanics and dynamics of a healthy, successful relationship. Because the reality is we aren't taught this stuff. We're not taught it in school. We haven't really been modeled successful relationships in most homes. So
Mm.
I studied it from the perspective of what typically goes wrong in most relationships, like from the divorce perspective, because I was divorced. I dealt with alimony and child support and visitation rights and family court. And from a therapist perspective or human behavior perspective, I studied what goes wrong in relationships as a way to determine how you can go about it in the right way. And so a lot of dating advice is based on egoic perspective. It's all based on romance and chemistry driven. But what we've come to learn is chemistry is not an indication of relationship success. You can have amazing chemistry with someone, but be completely incompatible, completely not share the same values, not have blendable lifestyles. And then the bigger issue is emotional maturity. The vast majority of the population has very weak emotional maturity or weak interpersonal skills and communication skills. So there's no wonder we have a dysfunctional relationship dynamic going out, especially here in the United States. And
That's so interesting. Okay.
well, what I was about to say is I also began recognizing that dating and relationships triggers the number one emotional health issue almost everybody faces. And that is, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, I'm not likable. And dating and relationships can trigger all of our inner wounds and hurts like nobody's business. And I began leaning to how to solve that problem. How do we solve that piece of the puzzle? And it led me to writing my second book called What the Heck is Self-Love Anyway? And I'm sure you've heard the phrase, how can you love yourself? How can you love another if you don't love yourself, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's what my book is, an invitation for personal development work, self-help, spiritual work, so you can love on yourself from the inside out.
So how do you help? Okay, so the questions that come to mind, you talk about dysfunctional relationships. What are like the biggest things that you see that don't work in relationships? What would make somebody compatible? And then I'm just throwing questions at you that come up as you talk. And then the last one is we can kind of get a little bit more into the self-love and how you found self-love and how you teach others.
Yeah. So let's look at, I've come up with what I call the 4 pillars to a successful relationship. And chemistry is pillar number 1. It's the first thing we recognize. We see it, when we have chemistry, when we feel an energetic connection, we feel a physical connection, we have a desire to be intimate with someone. So that's the first pillar, first leg of the table, if you will, of relationship success. The second pillar is shared values. And think about it, before the world got bigger, most people lived in small towns, they lived in villages. Most of the time you shared the same values. You basically had the same philosophies and the same values if you grew up in a small village or a town. As we began to expand as a society, we became a melting pot of different experiences, different values. And this is where a lot of friction happens in relationships. So I'll give you an example in today's world. Now, this is my presumption, so let me play this out for a second. But I think if someone loves Donald Trump, right, just loves his politics, loves everything about Donald Trump, and someone loves Bernie Sanders, as an example, chances are they don't share the same values. Would you agree?
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And obviously I'm talking about 2 extremes, and I'm not talking about those situational values, but I'm talking about that's 2 different ideologies, 2 different values. Another example of different values might be someone who's religious and goes to church a couple times a week and carries the Bible with them versus someone who's an atheist. 2 people that have probably vastly different values.
Mm.
If someone is, highly devout in their religion, and someone who could care less about religion. So I'm not suggesting that these are deal breakers per se, but it's very problematic. So
I was gonna say I can relate personally to the Donald Trump versus Bernie Sanders in my household.
Okay.
Not that we're but just our political views are a little more conflicting than others, which makes for interesting conversations. But maybe the rest of your pillars can kind of help me understand why this works in my dynamic.
So, let me touch upon that. I'm talking about the extremes, not the,
Yeah.
most people, truthfully, most people are pretty moderate in their politics, and most people are pretty moderate in their religion. I'm just using that as an example of values. But, and we oftentimes think of values like honesty, integrity, and trust. And to me, those are givens. But there's over, I think, a list of 400 values if you want to Google it. So, all right. So that's an example. If you don't share the same values, or you're extremely misaligned in your values. That's number 2. Number 3 is blendable lifestyles. Most people when they're dating, they think of like things like, you like sushi? Me too. You like snowboarding? I love it. You like the Rolling Stones? My favorite band. Oh my God, we have so much in common, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sure, it's important to have familiarity, but what about blendable lifestyles? If two people's lifestyles aren't compatible with one another, there's oftentimes going to be friction. And yet people go, but if we love each other, we'll figure it out. Well, yeah, that's true. But oftentimes it's women making huge compromises and sacrifices. I'm not saying it is an absolute, but, pretzeling themselves, trying to fit into someone else's lifestyle. So it's just be mindful of these areas is what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But the 4th pillar is the biggest one, or not the biggest one, maybe the thickest one. I don't know how to describe it, but, is what I call emotional maturity or emotional grown-upness.
Yeah.
Most humans have very weak emotional skills, like interpersonal skills, communication skills. And so this is where a lot of friction happens in relationships, because on some level, it takes a high level of emotional maturity to basically navigate and be in a healthy relationship. So let me give you some examples. Your actions match your words, okay? That's an example of emotional maturity. In other words, your actions match your words. And while we're always going to falter at some point, it's a consistency. And some people are not consistent with their words. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. So number 2 is taking personal responsibility for your choices. It's interesting here in the United States, we're riddled with victim consciousness. It's always someone else's fault. Very few people take ownership on their part, even if someone did, like in a relationship, was unfaithful. It's one thing to point the finger at your partner as an example, but it's another to say, you know what, I have to look at my part and how that happened. And that's emotional maturity, when you can look at, how did I play into this role, and look at your piece in the puzzle. And I'm using the infidelity as one example.
Mm-hmm.
A real strength in emotional maturity is being able to learn how to, what I call, fight fair. And what I'm talking about is healthy conflict resolution skills. It's interesting, Sasha. Most people, when they have a disagreement with someone, is I'm right and you're wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yep.
in other words, my point of view is right and you're wrong. But healthy, learning how to fight fair is going, I'm going to listen to my partner's point of view. I'm going to accept their point of view as being true for them. I'm going to share my point of view, and I would hope you accept it. And we might agree to disagree, because relationships are going to have friction. You're never going to be perfectly aligned, but learning how to fight fair is huge. And a lot of people are stuck in ego, and I have to win for this relationship to succeed. So these are just a few examples to kind of give you the 4 pillars of relationship success.
Yeah, I like that last part. The people that I've worked with in the past tend to hold on to a lot of anger and point the blame. I think that's probably most people can relate to that. They get angry if people don't agree with them and that they're right. And so I always say, like, what's more important to you? Feeling angry or being right, basically. So would you rather feel free and just let it go, or would you rather be right and angry? Because sometimes we really hang on to those emotions, and that's again where emotional intelligence comes in, and being able to kind of work through those feelings and thoughts and voice those too. Like sometimes it's hard to communicate how you're actually feeling with your partner or with anybody in general.
You bring up a great point, and I want to also add or piggyback. It's not you should never compromise your own position to make someone happy. In other words, I think it's important. Do you want to be right or do you want to be happy, as you said? But also, it's not like it's not being a doormat. Your feelings matter. In fact, the chapter 1 in my book is called "Speak Your Truth, Do It with Kindness," and
I
that
love
is
that.
your truth is your feelings. That's your truth. And your feelings are true for you. Someone else's feelings is true for them. See, a lot of people look at feelings as facts, and
Yes.
FACS, right? Feelings aren't facts. Feelings are just feelings. And feelings change all the time. I feel sad. I feel happy. I feel remorse. I feel guilt. I feel resentment. I feel joy. I feel gratitude. Those are all feelings. And so I encourage share your truth or share your feelings. Just do it in a kind, non-confrontational way.
I like that. So then talking about feelings, I think that kind of leads us nicely into self-love and how you can feel self-love. So what was your journey like with that, and how did you embody that so that you can teach others?
Yeah, I love this question. Thank you so much. So for those listening, God, I'm tongue-tied right now. I lost my 19-year-old son a year and a half ago, almost coming up on 2 years now. And anyone who's a parent knows that your greatest fear and certainly a nightmare is to experience the loss of a child. It just goes against our natural order of things. And at the time I was at his funeral giving his eulogy, I stopped right in the middle and I said, I'm going to make a conscious choice and I'm going to grieve with love. And what I meant by that was I know suffering could be another way to grieve. I could grieve through pain and suffering. I could allow this to take me down the rabbit hole of despair. And I know my son, his name is Connor, would never want me to be sad. And so I began doing a deep dive into love. And right after he passed, I was like really searching for meaning in all of this. And do you remember earlier when I was talking about dating and relationships trigger the number one emotional health issue? And at that time, I was like leaning into, why is that? Why is that? And then self-love kept coming up, and love just kept coming over and over again. And I just started writing about self-love. And as I started to write about it and write it, not necessarily specific to dating, but just in emotional well-being, I published the book 9 months after the day he passed. And I realized at the end of the book, it was a journey to encourage people to begin a personal development, self-help, and spiritual practice as a daily, vitamin, if you will. I always say it's an vaccination to emotional chaos when we can begin to love on ourselves, and a lot of people think self-love is woo-woo or might be turned off. So for those that kind of feel that way, I want to say self-love means self-worth, self-esteem, self-confidence. It's all on how do we love on our emotional well-being, not so much physical. Some people think of self-love as self-care. Self-care is the manicures, the pedicures, the working out and exercising. That's for our physical well-being. Self-love is for our emotional well-being.
I like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think a lot of people get hung up on, even like me, like before I went into or got into personal development and things like that, self-care, I would always say is a luxury. And that was just, kind of a lack mindset that I had, but I was like, oh yeah, it must be nice to go get, manicures and massages and things like that. And then as I dove into the journey, a lot of the inner work, the outer work can help with the inner work. So I find that a lot of people start with, the dieting and the exercising and the trying to make themselves look and feel better. And then after you kind of get a good grip on that, you're like, okay, what's next? Like, what's that deeper level? And it's kind of like peeling back those layers of the onion until you get to the core and you're like, wow, okay, this is what it really feels like. And I don't know if you ever get to the quote unquote like end, because I feel like every year or every experience I have, it kind of uncovers, or if I have a trigger, I'm like, oh, whoop, there's something I got to work on. Maybe I can practice a little bit more self-love in this area. And even right now with all this COVID and Corona stuff going on, I feel like people maybe put a lot of pressure on themselves, or situations are changing and they start to question their worth or their ability. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, definitely on the body piece, because, as you were talking about health and whatnot, and on some level, what's great about that is it's something we can do immediately. In other words, one of the chapters in my book is called "Your Body is a Machine, Not a Temple," and I meant by that, and it's a tongue-in-cheek on that phrase, your body is a temple, right? I'm like, no, your body is a machine. And when you treat it with healthy nutrients and food and eat healthy foods, you begin to heal on the inside out. And so I'm a huge proponent of that. But stepping into that emotional well-being, that emotional piece is... The reality is we live with our emotions every day, and we're going to have highs and lows. And you talked about triggers, right? I mean, triggers are going to happen all the time. In other words, things are going to trigger us to feel unease in our lives, right? And I jokingly say for myself, whenever I get triggered on something, I go, wow, that's an interesting choice today to love on myself. Like I'll give you an example. Someone wrote a scathing review on one of my podcasts. By the way, my podcast is called the What Would Love Do podcast, right? So I get this scathing review, and in retrospect, and I recognize why she might have said that. I did say something that I wished I said a little bit better. It could have been explained better. Did it deserve this kind of negativity be thrown out at me? I don't think so, but it happened. So, but my point is, I read it and I go, oh, I'm a piece of crap. Like, I literally believed what she was saying about me for a moment. I took it in and I allowed that negativity to absorb me. And my little kid inside of me believed her for a moment. Then I paused and by the way, and I was very upset, but I recognize this is one of my patterns. I have to remember to love on myself, because I'm doing my best I can to give good content, to give good information. Yeah, I could have said something a little better, but I don't need to beat myself up, to self-crucify when these things happen. So I go, wow, this is an interesting way to love on myself. And then, within 24 hours, I was over it. But I know that self-attack is one of my challenges in life, and I get triggered all the time in that capacity.
I self-sabotage is what I call whatever it is that I do. Like, anytime I hit like a successful thing, I'm like, oh, you don't deserve this. Or I tell myself I'm a piece of shit a lot. And I think it's so interesting that so for me, and maybe you can relate to this, but I can get compliments all day long. Like, you can throw compliments at me, and I've gotten a lot better over the years at accepting those compliments, but to a point it's almost like, okay, cool. Yeah. Like, I get it, and then I get one negative thing and you like dwell on it. And I see this a lot of times. Like, you could be doing amazing. Thousands of people think that you're doing amazing things. One person says your content sucks. And if you don't have a solid grasp on what self-love looks like, or you feel, if you're not doing the steps, you talk about daily vitamin. If you're not taking that daily vitamin, that daily act of self-love, something like that can be very detrimental to you or your business or your lifestyle. You could start to spiral very, very easily.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And self-attack, or self-crucifixion is this is common amongst most human beings, is that I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, I do things wrong. It relates to when our excuse me parental, when your parents say, oh, you're doing something wrong, and that negativity after a while starts to bleed into believing that we're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm a big proponent of personal development work, self-help work, spiritual work as a way to heal from that I'm not good enough. And I'm a person that does this every day, and I got triggered last week by this. By the way, I had 100 reviews, only one bad one, right?
I know, that's what
like
I
what
mean.
you're saying. And I'm like, and that one hurts the most. And it's but this is the fascinating part about being a human. Like I'm learning now to just laugh at it all. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
stung, but about an hour or two later, I'm like, God, Jonathan, come on. And I know some people are listening and you're like, why'd you let that happen? But it's just part of being human. And so it's an interesting journey, this ride we call life, and it's called a journey because it's a roller coaster. It's not a perpetual upward, graph, if you will, of happiness. We're meant to experience these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the peaks and valleys, and I know that I've been. I even think back like a decade ago, and I could have a very, very different lifestyle if I didn't choose to. Every time you come to a fork in the road, it's like you have a decision, and over a series of good decisions,
Yeah.
after a series of very, very bad decisions, I mean, you're able to take, what could have been your life into something now. And each time you come to like a crossroads, or you're triggered, or you have those feelings of self-doubt, I look at it now as an opportunity to heal versus spiraling and saying that, getting stuck in that, oh, I suck, da, 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 da. Because I don't know who came up with this or where I got this from, but like the compound effect. So no matter what you do each day, it's going to compound over time. So if you're practicing self-love every day, you're getting a little bit closer to self-love, a little bit closer to self-love. And over time, you're going to have much more in your self-love bucket than if you tell yourself that you suck every day, or if you just decided like, oh, well, I'm just going to eat this bag of Cheetos. Oh, I'm just going to have this 6-pack of beer. Oh, I'm just going to do this. And then over time, those negative, I don't even know if I want to say negative, but those other decisions compound too. So does that make sense?
I want to piggyback on this one.
Okay.
I want to piggy. So you were so spot on. And so when I shared earlier, when I went through a divorce, at the time I went through a divorce, I lost my $250,000 a year job. I'm going through an emotionally contentious divorce. And then the market crash of 2008 wiped me out financially. This is over a period of a couple of years. And
dang.
Yeah. And I went to bed wishing I didn't wake up for over a year.
Yeah.
And I'm wiped out financially. I've got this contentious divorce. My self-esteem is shot, and I literally don't want to live. I didn't want to die. I didn't want to kill myself. I just didn't want the pain anymore. And that's when the movie, I started to watch The Secret. I listened to Abraham Hicks, like Wayne Dyer. I mean, I got into Tony Robbins at one point, and I got turned on to Michael Singer and The Untethered Soul and Marianne Williams.
Yes.
Turn to Love. And I mean, the Hoffman process and insight, and I started to do all this work. I mean, not only, and I was starting a dating coaching business along the way. It's kind of like I was building the airplane while it was in midair. In other words, the plane wasn't built. I'm building it as I'm flying. So the reason why I share this is that as I look back now, if I hadn't done all that work, I don't think I would have been prepared for the loss of my son. I think, and what I'm saying from an emotional perspective, I believe all of those little building blocks along the way prepared me to navigate this experience with a lot more dignity and grace versus pain and suffering, as I said before. So that's why I'm a huge proponent of it's little tiny building blocks. And, I'm sure you've heard the phrase, which wolf do you want to feed? Do you want to feed it with, do you want to feed your wolf with healthy, nurturing, happy thoughts? Or do you want to feed it with not negative, but what you were saying, negative thoughts? because ultimately the more you feed it, the more you're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
Of which, which do you want to be positive about your life, or do you want to be negative? It's Eeyore or Tigger, basically.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So how do you think that played into losing your son and going through, because grief, I even feel like, is a process, and there's different levels of grief. And I don't know if grief ever truly leaves you. Maybe it does, but I was just talking to another person earlier today. Was it today? Yeah, I think it was today. And we talked about, how certain things, even years later, can trigger you to bring you right back to that moment. And I don't know if grief is also a practice. I know for me, the people or the things that have closest to me that I've lost, if somebody says something at just the right time, like I can just still like bring myself to tears. And while I'm not like hysterical, I still feel those feelings, and I'm like, it's okay to feel sad.
Yeah, I don't think everyone's experience with grief is unique to them. I'm not sure I agree with some of the beliefs around you get over it. You get I think it's something you experience, but there's not you don't get through it. You don't get over it, kind of thing. It's just going to be a
Yeah.
constant in our lives. And what's interesting was I went 50 years before I experienced any significant death in my inner circle. My mother had passed away. Actually, my mother passed away 6 months before my son did. So I had back-to-back experiences.
My goodness.
So but I imagine, I was thinking to myself, well, what if I had loss at age 20 or 25, or a different, in other words, a parent, a friend, that sort of thing. I didn't experience loss before. Now that I've experienced it, I'm also recognizing it's part of life. In other words, that's the reality, is this is part of life. And so embracing loss in a different way, and that's why I said spiritual work earlier, personal development, self-help, spiritual work.
Mm-hmm.
I look at Connor and my mom as a transition to another realm of being, if you will, a spiritual being.
It.
And while their mortal bodies are not here, their spiritual essence is still here. I just have a different relationship with them. And so for me, I'm going to say this is how I rationalize it, and I say the word rationalize, that's how I navigate it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a part of my life. And I recognize that loss didn't end my life. In other words, the loss of my son, which I thought would have been devastating to me personally, I'm leaning more into love and gratitude than choosing to focus on the loss itself. I don't know if I'm making sense, because I feel like I'm babbling a little bit, but this is such a hard thing to explain.
I know.
But I feel him, and I recognize that this is he's still part of my life. It's just a different form. And that's how I get through it, with it. And, that's how I navigate life, more from what would love do and how would love respond.
Yeah, I like that. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but do you feel like you have like when you lost your son, that almost like it was like a new awakening or a new appreciation for life? Or because for me, when I've experienced those things, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, okay, if this person's not here, I'm going to make sure that I really, really live my life to the fullest, because that's what so-and-so would have wanted for me.
So I love this question, because it's interesting. I often say, instead of going to church on Sundays, we should go to funerals every Sunday, because, and let me explain why I say that. It's because everybody who leaves a funeral, they say this literally, and this is a judgment on my part, or
that's okay,
part, is I'm not going to waste another day of my life. And then
yes,
3 days later, we go right back to our old patterns.
Absolutely.
I think what's made it unique for me is it birthed a different view on love. Just like when I chose to about a year ago, I lost 25 pounds. It had nothing to do with my son. I decided to change the way I eat. I wanted to eat healthy, and I changed the way I view food. And so I just began putting healthy foods in my body, and I lost 25 pounds in 3 months. Um, and it's the same here. It's like I'm choosing to feed my body with love. And that's a daily requirement for me. How can I choose to love? How can I be in a state of love? How can I look from the eyes of love? Those are, it's like put a stamp on my forehead is the word love. um, and it's a daily thing. And so it's one thing to say it cavalierly, oh, I went to I lost someone, I'm not going to waste another day of my life, versus action. And many people don't have the discipline to actually make it part of your daily life. And I'm here to say it requires a level of discipline to say, I'm choosing to make love my priority and not watching the Kardashians and not buying the $500 pairs of shoes. And I have thousands of them in my closet as a joke. And I'm saying this as a joke, is I'm a big proponent, and I'm being a little bit judgmental here.
It's okay.
But I'm here to suggest, hey, I want everyone to wake up. Look, materialism, yeah, I know that's great, makes you feel good, but you know what feels even better? When you love on yourself and make that the priority.
Exactly. And I find that the more you love yourself, the less you need that other stuff. Like I don't need, it's so funny because I can totally relate to this because I was that, and the shoes and the shopping and shit, that kind of like sparks like something for me because I had those, like, I need a quick fix. Like, oh, I feel like shit. I'm going to go buy a new outfit, or I'm going to go get my hair done, or I'm going to go, buy this bottle of champagne and I'm going to have a drink tonight because I freaking deserve it. But then the next day I feel like shit. It's that immediate gratification versus delayed gratification. And I find that like buying stuff or like those things, it's like very makes you feel good in the moment, but long term it doesn't. And then when you start to really love yourself on the inside for who you are and what you value and what you put into the world and your intentions behind your actions, you kind of care less about what fancy shoes you have or what so-and-so is wearing. And somebody posted the other day, there's like this, I'm going to botch the name, Kristen Cava something. Anyways, apparently she was married and had like some show. Oh, fuck, I'm going to forget what it is. But people are like devastated over it. And I'm like, I don't even know who that is because I don't care. Like I have my own reality show going on. Like I don't need to watch somebody else's life.
Oh, I did a meme, or I created a quote. I said, become the reality show other people want to watch.
Oh, I
in
like
other words,
that.
Make your life so wonderful, become the reality show other people want to watch. What you just said so resonates with me. And I will say that, I mean, I do have one vice, and I love flying first class, but most everything else in my life, I don't have a lot of material things because, and what's interesting, let me pivot from here for a second. We were talking about COVID. What's going to be fascinating in the next few months is that advertising and media will begin to do a heavy push on materialism to navigate the emotional effects of what's happened. I mean, the negative effects. In other words, the loss of income, the loss of jobs, the loss of rights and whatnot. And what's going to happen is, this is just a supposition on my part, is that there's going to be a big push to buy things so you can feel good about yourself. And
I've already seen it happening. Yes.
Exactly. So, we're all in it together, according to every car company and everything. Like, right. You know what? Yeah, I need to buy that $50,000 car to feel good.
I don't have a job, but I'm going to buy a new car and not have payments for 6 months. And then when the payments happen, what the hell am I going to do?
Yeah. So here's what I want to recommend everybody buy when you feel ready to go spend some money. If you're going to spend money, here's one thing I want everybody to buy, and it's less than $20. You can go to Amazon and buy a book called The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. And first off, everyone listening, please do me a favor. Only read one chapter at any sitting. Do not read more. It's pretty deep. But I promise you, in 19 days, if you read one chapter a day, it will change your life immensely. It is like so beautifully written to help us learn how to talk to the voices in our head and how to heal from the inside out. So please make your choice. Instead of buying that $50,000 car or those $400 shoes or this or that to feel good, buy this book, because it's worth every penny and 10,000 times more. Sorry, I was being preachy, Sasha.
That's okay. I get really preachy on her sometimes. I'm like, stop buying the shit and invest in yourself. And then after you feel better on the inside. And the other thing that I do about purchases, I don't buy anything like quick fix anymore. I always like sit on things. And if I still need it in 24 hours, 48 hours, a week, 30 days, then I'll probably go back and buy it if it's something I can't stop thinking about, but never in the moment anymore. I have,
Yeah,
I don't know. I feel like if we can really sit with that and be like, why, ask yourself, like, why am I buying this right now? Is it to make me feel good? Is it because somebody else has it? Is it because this, like, or is this really going to help whatever? Is it something that you need, or is it something that you want? Like, there's just lots of questions that you can ask yourself in that. And I found that I'm also happier and I love myself more when I can look at my bank account and be like, wow, I actually have money in there because I didn't blow all my money on stupid stuff throughout the entire month.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. After, I remember I told you I had a $250,000 a year job. I mean, back then I lived very much egoic based living. And after that, I got wiped out in the market. And I'm talking a 7-figure wipeout. I began living life like this. Let me be frugal on most everything that's important. And then I have the occasional frivolousness. In other words, the occasional, I'm going to treat myself to something, even if it's, either ridiculously expensive or do I need it kind of thing. There's the occasional, I'll treat myself kind of emotion, but predominantly, I'm not in a place of scarcity. Because I think that's an energy that's not healthy. But I'm like I do exactly what do you do? Do I really need that? Like,
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, I literally, after my divorce or after I went through this crash, I sold everything. And literally at one point could put my entire life into 2 suitcases. And it was so freeing. I can't begin to tell you how freeing it was to not have stuff in my life. It was like freedom. It was like self-love freedom.
I know, the more stuff I get rid of and like can donate and just like get out of this house, it's like, I don't know, if you feel so light, like, and it's refreshing to be like, oh, I have the bare minimum. People would give me crap because they come over to my house and I have like, I'm not very decorative, so I just don't have a lot of stuff on my walls. Part of me wants stuff on my walls because I think it looks nice, but the other part of me is like, does this really have a purpose? And I don't know, when I can just like get rid of stuff that no longer serves me, it does. It's very, very, very freeing.
Yeah, it's just, I think we have such, especially here in the United States, it's such a consumer-oriented way of thinking. And what self-love says, your emotional well-being is the most important factor in your life. I mean, physical well-being too, don't get me wrong, but emotional well-being. And like you said, I believe that once individuals choose to go on a path of nurturing one's soul, spirit, well-being, material things just don't have that same pull as much anymore.
So what steps can somebody take, and we'll kind of start wrapping this up, but what steps can somebody take to start their journey to self-love? Like, what do you recommend people, other than, reading books, what would be something else that you would tell someone to do?
Well, first off, buy my book, What the Heck is Self-Love Anyway? First off, listening to this podcast is a form of self-love. I mean, so this is great. You're doing a great job for others to be able to connect with people like myself and others. So, continue to listen to Sasha's podcast, number one. Buy my book, number two. I'm a big proponent of exploring different role models and teachers in your life. For example, I lean towards the personal development teachers like Abraham Hicks, Wayne Dyer, and so many others, Marianne Williamson, just to name a few. Start exploring what feels right for you, because everybody has a different feeling, a different perspective on life. So start exploring personal development. A lot of times the words meditation comes out. I'm a big proponent of meditating each day, but meditation doesn't have to be sitting in lotus position going, mindful meditation could be just simply taking a walk. I live by the ocean, so I was going to say take a walk by the beach or a park or whatnot, and put on a headset and listen to meditative music, and not necessarily just for even 5 minutes to quiet your mind. Is another example. Certainly physical exercise is another example of self-love, nurturing our bodies. But I'm a big proponent. Tony Robbins calls it, for those, most everybody knows who Tony Robbins is, he calls it the hour of power. In other words, 1 hour devoted to your well-being, nurturing your soul. An hour is a lot for most people. I'm here to say start with 15 minutes. 15 minutes. And you know what's sad, Sasha? Like, I have dear friends who are emotionally in chaos. And I'm like, can you just start 15 minutes? I don't have enough time. I'm like, 15 minutes? I don't have enough time. I'm like, no, you don't have enough time to be in the hospital 5 years from now going through a cardiac arrest. You don't have time for that. This is important to do this now. Please, please, please. I'm sorry, I'm screaming at my friend as I say that. Because that's when you got plenty of time to do work when you're dead. I'm just kidding. A lot of people say you have plenty of time to sleep when you're dead. No, you have plenty of time to do work when you're dead. No, work on yourself now, because being busy is not necessarily a pathway to emotional success.
No, absolutely not. And I find that in our culture, in our society, we are very reactive instead of proactive. And so a lot of times it does take somebody to get sent to the hospital or have an accident or something detrimental. Yes. Before they're like, oh, wow. Okay. Maybe what I'm doing is not working. And that's kind of the goal of this podcast too, is to say like, hey, you don't have to wait till you hit like a rock bottom or have like a life-changing event to say, okay, things aren't going the way that I want them to be going right now. What intentional action steps can I take right now today to live a life I love and create that life you love? Like, you're never going to get more time. That's something that you are never going to get more of. So this podcast, like this last 45 minutes that people have been listening to us, like this is done and gone, right? It's out into the world. We're never going to get it back.
Yeah.
You can be intentional with how you choose your time in the day. So if you can create that space for the 15 minutes, and that, again, going back to like the compounding, like that will compound over time, and think where you'll be at 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, if you don't delay it anymore.
Yeah. And as you're saying this, something just occurred to me that I want to share.
Yes.
So if hearing about the book, The Untethered Soul, inspired you, here's my invitation, because this is going to help reinforce this. So I'm not big on giving unsolicited advice to people. I always think if you're going to share wisdom, ask permission first. But for those who buy this book, here's an invitation for you. Teach what you learn in one chapter to someone else, if you have their permission. In other words, read a chapter, teach it to someone else. Okay? By teaching it to someone else, you reinforce the learning for yourself, and you actually become a more active participant in your own growth when you can actually start to part wisdom to others. So read a chapter, tell a friend about it. Read another chapter, tell a different friend about it. It's going to reinforce your learning, and it's going to be, paying it forward along the way. So it's just a suggestion I have, and it occurred to me while you were just sharing.
No, I love that. That is, I think, perfect. So how can people get your book? How can they learn more about you? How can they learn more?
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciated this, Sasha. So a couple different places. My name is Jonathon Aslay. I'm sure it'll be in the show notes, so you can look up my name on Google. I've got a website, jonathanaslay.com. I've got a YouTube channel under my name. I have a podcast called the What Would Love Do podcast, where we explore life, love, and the pursuit of inner peace through the eyes of love. And then I've got my book, What the Heck is Self-Love Anyway, which you could type in selflovethebook.com, because I own that URL, selflovethebook.com, to check out my book. So those are just a couple places besides social media and Twitter and all that good stuff.
Awesome. I love that. Yeah, I'll definitely put all of your links in the show notes so that listeners can just scroll on down and then be able to get those
thank
easily.
you. I appreciate that.
Well, thanks again for doing this. I feel like I learned a whole lot, especially about the 4 pillars of relationships and self-love and your journey and grief. So I really appreciate you taking the time and doing this with me.
Oh, well, thank you so much. You're a great interviewer, Sasha. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Sasha Davis podcast. It would mean so much to me if you could take 3 seconds out of your day and leave me an honest review on your podcast app, or take a quick screenshot and share to your social media and tag a friend, letting us know what you enjoyed most about this episode. And as always, for free resources and ways to work with me, head on over to my website, sashadavis.com, or send me a message on Facebook or Instagram at sasha.davis. And I hope you guys have a kick-ass day.